This is another tape in the series where we're considering the thinking skills development that Fischer and others describe, and also the literate practices, which are tools that I'm encouraging you to consider teaching yourself, because they can be so useful to you as you try to make sense out of all this material that I'm going to throw at you and which the study guide presents. What little feedback I've had after almost 5 years about the study guide is just, oh, it's deep, or it's too hard to understand. That's the reason for these videos, for me to sit down with you and take these things one item at a time and try to elaborate them enough for you to be able to catch the vision of what they're about and what their potential is. And so I'm concerned that, as we have discussed in the previous tapes, that you yourself are on a pathway to develop the mind-brain complex which is lodged in the body the Lord has loaned you for your journey here in mortality, to make sure that you're meeting the milestones that are available to you at your age, and to be sure that you're learning to possess and use tools that will make that capacity real and effective. Now, I'm going to put this into a thumbnail, which will be found on this video, but it says a good source of data about this is found in the School of Mind, Brain Education associated with Kurt W. Fischer at Harvard. Your Google and Thumbum will help you find it. And then it's Kurt W. Fischer Summer Institute presentation at Ross Institute on Skill Theory. And then it gives you the link to the YouTube recording of that presentation. So I would suggest that you watch that at your earliest convenience. I personally had to put it on the big screen in my living room in order to get the volume high enough to be able to hear everything he was saying. So just a heads up on that, to be sure that you really are able to hear it and benefit from it. And this, again, is a little bit out of step, but it draws from the levels of thinking skills, which I will be putting out in a video here very shortly, which may come before this one, actually. I'm sort of putting these on my computer, working to get the thumbnails together, and then evaluating which order I should present them in. The concept learning sequence is very important. I need to be concerned about being sure that you know what you need to know in order to understand what I'm about to present, so that that learning takes place smoothly. But anyway, level 10 is the highest order of thinking skills. This is where you use abstractions. This is where principles live. And that's one of the things that concerns me so much, is that we begin to teach immature minds principles at too high a level. They don't understand. It makes them feel stupid in some cases. But this is where the seeds of apostasy begin to be sown, is in this kind of disjunction or disjoint between what a mind is able to understand and that which is being foisted upon them, especially when it's done with the power of social pressure. So be aware of these things, and we'll round this out as we go along. But it says, what sense does it make to think you're teaching at the principles level thinking skills if the mind you're working with hasn't developed the ability to deal with them? It's called dumping the whole load of hay on a person. And in these previous videotapes, I have mentioned that you have tools available to you by which you can profile your learner. And one of the things that you can learn is at what level of abstract thinking are they functioning? And also at what level are they capable of functioning with a little support from the environment? So that you make sure that when you present principles which can be presented at lower levels, you're using lower level terminology and approach, and you're not making it so complicated that the person, in order not to appear stupid, just sort of backs off. But the point is that if it doesn't sink in and take hold, it isn't active in their mind or in their life. And this is a point where we begin to lose these young minds, the minds of our converts and the minds of others. They just haven't been prepared properly to be able to consider these things. Now, there's a quotation. This is by Joseph Smith, and I'll put it into a thumbnail also. But he says, "A fanciful and flowery and heated imagination beware of, because the things of God are of deep import, and time and experience, and careful and ponderous and solemn thoughts can only find them out. Thy mind, O man and woman, if thou wilt lead a soul to salvation, must stretch as high as the utmost heavens, and search into and contemplate the darkest abyss, and the broad expanse of eternity. Thou must commune with God." And that's quoted from the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, 137, 25th March, 1839. I'm hoping that you're beginning to see a connection between what Joseph Smith is saying and what's being presented to you in these tapes. The other thing that Joseph Smith says, "I teach the people correct principles, and they govern themselves." And I like to say, I teach them correct principles correctly, and they govern themselves. So I'm hoping that we can sharpen our ability to teach these principles to the exact needs of our learners. Anyone or any method of teaching that ignores these facts may be doomed to using band-aid feel-good material and practices that do not address the basic problem, which is that we present developmentally appropriate instruction that speaks to the present capacity of the brain we are seeking to reach, and processes to provoke the abilities that are or soon will be emerging in that mind. And that's where we get into Vygotsky, who talks about the zone of proximal development. He was saying that if you're just teaching at the level you've analyzed in them, you're missing a great opportunity. Because if their mind is growing, then there are skills and capacities emerging, and you want to teach to those too. And just to go ahead a step or two, how you do that is by scaffolding them. In other words, helping them do things which they can only do with your support, and teaching them to go back and forth across the border between their ordinary thinking and their optimal new thinking until they can take over for themselves at that new level. Then you have helped them greatly, because you've helped them develop their mind-brain complex to be able to handle more complex ideas. And this is sort of how the process works. These are all things that will be considered in the upcoming videotapes or the things that are being presented already, so that you can get a handle on them. But I think one of the things you need to do, I hesitate to use the word need, that's a parent word, and I'm not into lecturing you about anything. I'm just wanting to share with you things that I have found to be beautiful and useful and good. But it says if you're teaching at the level 10 principles and that mind is not ready, what do you expect? And now the question is, what if that's your mind? What if you have not had the opportunity to participate in the environment and provoke these skills and abilities and actualize and consolidate them and make them your own? If you plan to be a master interventionist, a master of mortality, you will need to be able to comprehend these things and use them. So, going forward, we need to be sure we ourselves are progressing toward achieving these developmental milestones ourselves, even as we start seeking to help others. The neat thing is, even if you're starting from scratch, studying and prayerfully seeking to understand the material you'll find here will start to lay down a foundation in your mind upon which to build these intellectual powers and to develop the necessary neural pathways in your brain. Remember to be patient with yourself. Such processes take time. And then in my notes, I recommend that you read Sternberg on the nature of intelligence before you write yourself off as too dumb to be able to do this. And also I recommend that you look seriously at the literate practices, because they, as tools, as you incorporate them into your mind, will literally help you to create those new neural pathways that you need. Adopting these tools to use in your own studies will make it easier for the material to be organized in your own mind and to be available when you begin crafting deliberate, targeted, educational and spiritual interventions for others. The material you will study provides rich resources for helping others. Also develop a broadly based body of knowledge out of which tools for thinking can grow, and which will greatly expand the horsepower of the mind to bring to bear on any new dilemmas or issues or instructions with which you wish to engage. Now, this is the thumbnails that are going to be put on the second half of the fourth YouTube video. I split that video into two parts because it was running too long, and yet I just felt like some of this information needs to be introduced early to give you an idea, to sense the power that's contained in the study of the study guide and its domains. So that's where we're going. Now, right now we're discussing the number 6, and it starts by saying this should not be taken to be a problem. And what they're talking about is that our resources are so rich, we just need to be able to understand them. He invites us to, in some degree, develop in ourselves a godlike mind that allows us to see what's going on around us, to perceive the actions and impact of sets, patterns, isolates. Those are all terms from Hall's study of culture, and other things, such as how culture can influence the growth of the human mind. talking about Feuerstein, and then it gives a website where you can go, and it's very productive. He's posted quite a bit of stuff, and his organization is still active. Most of the research I did was made in the 80s and 90s of the last century. But these people, one of the reasons I've chosen their work to highlight for you is that it has stood the test of time. The truths there are still true, and they've been elaborated now and are richer than they were then. But the idea is that these references I'm giving you will help you get acquainted with him and see him as the person he is, and then in studying the study guide and also looking up the original resources from which the study guide is created, you'll be able to put yourself better in what's going on in Feuerstein's domain. But this is what I'm saying. He speaks to what I've been saying all along. We need to be actively engaged in creating a world, a culture of godliness, with its associated society of Enoch and Melchizedek, Zion, that we can share with our progeny for 1,000 years. This is no small matter. This study guide presents a lot of material. We can't back off and say it's too hard. Or not worth the effort, unless we want to passively stand by and watch our descendants lose their way and darkness advance in our day. Now, the Lord has this tendency to allow us to learn and grow by doing, and He's made all of this material available and more. But He needs us to internalize it, to make it a part of our practices, to help us to be able to go to Him and ask for revelation and to ask insightful questions about what's going on around us, especially in dealing with these precious, precious human souls that we find around us. We need to be able to tap into the love with which Heavenly Father cherishes His children, and tap into how great the desire is of our Savior that every person should benefit from this opportunity to learn and to grow. And then we can offer our services. Here am I, Lord, send me. But you can create yourself into an instrument that can receive revelation, that can channel the power of the Holy Ghost, that can do so many things that you cannot do now because you are culturally blind to the culture of godliness. So you're being invited to inform yourself and then do the work that will help you create in yourself the elements of a master interventionist to teach as Jesus teaches. And I don't know about wealth and exaltation and glory and all of that. I don't know what I can achieve of that. But one thing I do know is that I can learn and understand this material, and I have used it with great benefit to myself and to those that I've been able to help. And so I want you to share in that same opportunity. That's why we're going through this. And then the last thing. And this is talking about MLE, which comes in under Feuerstein, mediated learning experiences. And what he and his team did was set up, I don't know how you would characterize it, experiences. Do you remember what we quoted from Hall at the very beginning? If you want someone to believe as you do, you need to recreate for them either vicariously or in real time, everything that has led you to believe as you do. This is a very powerful principle. And this is sort of what Feuerstein is talking about. They wanted to create interventions, and they call them that would lead a person's mind through the development of the understanding of the elements of the culture that they wanted them to understand and appreciate and adopt. And if you want to teach the gospel effectively, and one of my favorite sayings is, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Well, this comes under the heading of how to be effective in transmitting the culture of godliness and the elements of the society of Zion, so that a person can instruct their personality such that they can be a member of that society and be at home with those who are. Anyway, this says this involvement projects itself from the depths of the past to the future of humanity. If indeed MLE has such an impact on both the life of individuals and on their emotional and moral engagement toward their progeny, then many changes may have to be produced in our way of organizing society so as to create optimal conditions for mediational interventions. Now that is worth pondering. And I've called for this earlier by saying, how do we need to organize ourselves and our society to help to bring forth, find, and establish the millennial child, the ones that we're promised will grow up without sin unto salvation? What kind of an environment must we surround them with in order to strengthen them and help them to do this? You see, we talk about ourselves as being pioneers. Well, we are. But I'm wondering if we're developing the pioneering skills that are called for at this time to establish this foundation of the kingdom in this way, so that we can nurture a much higher percentage of our progeny, so that we can create optimal conditions for mediational interactions. In other words, if you're going to be an interventionist, the more you can know about what's out there to be known, the more you can know about your learner, then you can create optimal conditions for your interactions, your interventions. It says we may have to revise the idea of intergenerational discontinuity and counterculture in favor of a strong, planned, and controlled linkage between generations, particularly when life may tend to steer generations apart. Now, isn't that characterizing us right now? And don't we need to do that? We have to revise our ideas of intergenerational discontinuity and counterculture. In other words, we can't tolerate this idea that our progeny, the next generation, isn't getting it, that we're not sufficiently transmitting to them the culture that we have, the values, the knowledge, our testimony. And so what changes do we need to make in order to counteract these forces that are steering the generations apart, alienating us from our children? We need to be able to raise an effective response to the evil that's being promulgated in the world, that so many of our children are buying into. And I'm submitting to you that what we have going on here in these domains and this study guide is at least a beginning of how to be far more effective in this. In the modern world, there may have to be a different approach to instructional, educational, and social organization. Now you can just plug it in, okay? Instructional and educational, that's interventions. Social organization, that's demonstrating the elements of the culture of godliness. And when we get through with Hall, you'll be able to describe that culture in great detail and know what the elements of that culture are, and perhaps be able to devise interventions that will be able to make that clear and explicit and technical to your learners. And to create greater opportunities for intergenerational interaction and cultural transmission. Aren't these the issues we're dealing with right now? To me, they certainly are. That's why I'm so anxious for you to learn these things and to become aware of the potential you have. And then my little thing here that every once in a while I have to get personal. But it says, and you thought I just made up all this stuff I've been saying, preaching, nagging about needing a new social contract based in the culture of godliness and in the society of Zion. And then I give you the study guide page reference. And with all of these quotations and other things now, I'm trying to give you the reference in the study guide because I'm only touching on the surface of these things, just reflecting parts and pieces. But the whole thing is just waiting there for you. You can take any one of these thumbnails and go to the study guide and read a ton about them and educate yourselves to some of the great knowledge that's available in the world today. So, enough of that for now. Thank you for listening to me while I prattle. I just love to share these things because I have a vision of how important they can be and how precious they could become to you and to those that you love and to our society as a whole. Thank you for your time and attention. Now there's a quotation in Fischer chapter 1 from the development of abstractions in adolescence and adulthood. These are the study of literacy effects. So becoming literate has certain